Good afternoon. Welcome to New York Best's webinar on the outlook for energy storage in New York State. I'm Bill Acker, the Executive Director of New York Best. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few logistics. This webinar is being recorded, so you will have an opportunity. If you would like to request a recording to hear it again, you can do that by reaching out to New York Best. As we go through the webinar, we encourage questions. The questions, your lines are muted, so the questions are taken through the chat function on the webinar program. Please enter your questions in the chat box as we go through the webinar. We will collect the questions and at the end go through as many as possible and bundle together like similar questions together. Also, at the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. We greatly appreciate you taking a few moments to fill out that survey. It helps us continue to improve the quality of our offerings to you and also to demonstrate to our funding sources the quality of the board programs that we offer. So we do very much appreciate your participation and your involvement in the survey at the end. Today, we have three presenters from New York Best. In addition to myself, we have Denise Sheehan, who is the Senior Advisor to New York Best, who will be addressing the policy portions of today's webinar, and John Cerveny, Director of Resource Development from New York Best, who will be addressing the technology and commercialization ecosystem portions of today's webinar. We're also quite pleased to have a special guest with us for a short appearance, Jason Nolan from NYSERDA, who will be talking about NYSERDA's new soft cost initiatives within New York State. So, our webinar today is designed to go over what New York Best is doing in New York State and to give you a basis for what's going on in the state and in the industry. For those of you who aren't familiar with New York Best, we're an industry trade association. We have about over 150 member organizations, companies, universities, and other organizations. Our goal is to catalyze and grow the energy storage industry in New York State. We do this by providing information and connections, running series of conferences, and facilitating connections and putting out information in various different forms. We also do a lot of work accelerating commercialization, and you'll hear about some of the ecosystem work and some of the other work in that regard on today's webinar. We also educate policymakers and stakeholders and are quite active in the development of policies and regulations here in the state. And lastly, we promote New York Best's resources and markets, which we'll also touch on a bit in today's webinar. So the webinar today is really designed to give you a status update and to talk about what's going on in the state and also areas of focus for the future year for New York Best. We divided it and segmented it into three sections. The first section is technology and commercialization, what we're doing to build the ecosystem here in the state. The second section is around policy. There's a lot of work going on, particularly in the electricity grid sector, for crafting the right rules and regulations to enable the future electricity grid. And lastly, we will talk about markets in the state and how those policies are affecting the markets and how we're moving forward as we continue to see the penetration of energy storage in a number of markets in the state. So with that said, we're going to begin with technology and commercialization. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, John Cerveny, to talk about that subject.
Great. Thank you, Bill. As Bill said, we're going to start with an update on the array of resources and services that New York Best and our partners have put in place in the state. We tend to collectively refer to these resources as the energy storage ecosystem. So the ecosystem generally you can think of as designed to provide easy access to facilities and services that support energy storage technology development and commercialization. They include things like the battery prototyping, testing, and pilot manufacturing facilities that we've had a hand are available today with additional additions coming shortly, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Some of the advanced diagnostic capabilities across the state, and really a broad array of expert and special resources. One of the things that isn't highlighted in this webinar, but we do maintain is a resource database on the New York Best website that is a pretty solid resource in terms of energy storage capabilities, expertise, materials, and a whole host of, I think the word is speak louder, so I'll try to do better here. A whole host of resources that are available in a searchable format on the New York Best website, so I encourage you to take a look at that if you have need. A lot of the focus here is to provide access and information about the markets in New York State. We strive to help shape and grow technologies and companies in the direction of markets. Ultimately, the success here will be technologies that make it to market and are successful in meeting the needs of those marketplaces. And finally, New York Best has, from its beginnings, offered an array of services in terms of mentoring and advising to companies who are members and others. And we have continued to build out those services, and I'll talk a bit about some of that in just a moment. In the category of advising and services, starting back in the fall, we officially launched what's called the Bridge Program, Business Resources to Innovate, Develop, Grow, and Excel. This was funded in part by National Grid, and we're thankful for their support in helping to launch this program and focus our efforts. We have essentially, this is a process for startup companies who are in the energy storage field to get kind of the right advice at the right time and make connections to people in the marketplace, to other resources around the state, whether it's some of the prototyping and testing resources that we have available, or the numerous other resources that are out there that can help grow the technology to meet market needs. If you are a startup company listening to this and have needs, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you about the kinds of things we can do and help you with under Bridge. I'll move on to some of the commercialization resources that many of you are familiar with and actually have used probably along the way. We have the Best Testing Commercialization Center in Rochester at Eastman Business Park. This is a battery testing capability that was put in place beginning in 2014. Was when we went live with the Best Test Commercialization Center. DNVGL operates that center for us, and it's a pay-as-you-go user facility that provides an array of testing and diagnostic capabilities for energy storage systems. Just down the road at Rochester Institute of Technology, the Battery Prototyping Center, where there are all the facilities you need in one room to prototype pouch cell batteries, and that is operated by RIT and the service available to anyone who needs it. And we also have leveraged resources at Kodak, things like the digital pilot coder, the picture here, that have many applications across fields, including storage and batteries. And we've, in the past, benefited greatly from these public-private partnerships that have helped put these resources in place, and support from NYSERDA, from New York State, and particularly Finger Lakes Regional Economic Council. So we think there's clearly a role for these resources based on how they've been accessed and the companies they've helped to date. And if you have needs in these areas, I encourage you to reach out and learn more. Next up is an example of another one of the resources in the state that was supported by investment from the state of New York, $25 million to put in place a dedicated beam line at the National Synchrotron Light Source 2, located at Brookhaven National Lab. So this really leverages a nearly billion-dollar investment to create the NSLS-2 that now provides dedicated testing capabilities, including, in fact, in-operando testing. So batteries as they're being charged and discharged can be examined using the beam line and the equipment there. Again, this is a unique resource in the country, and we're very pleased to have it here in New York State. And now a little bit on what's coming, how we're focusing our efforts in this area at New York Best in the coming year. First is some additional capability at Kodak. Through a partnership, total value of about $6 million between equipment and facilities, we're putting in place with Kodak and New York State a pilot battery manufacturing capability. This will enhance and expand the number of batteries that can be built and the types of batteries that can be built here in the state. This will be a user-accessible facility. So you can see on the slide here a description of the types of cells that can be made and both batteries and ultracapacitors. And we're very pleased to have a hand in bringing this to life, and work is underway as we speak. Now, additional work will be done this year, both at the Battery Prototyping Center at RIT and at the Best Test and Commercialization Center at Eastman Business Park, to add capabilities related to, for the Battery Prototyping Center, the addition of cylindrical cell prototyping capabilities. Given the needs in the marketplace, there clearly has been demand for this capability at prototyping level, and we're happy to be able to put that in place this coming year. Additional capabilities at Best Test and Commercialization revolve around safety testing and the ability to meet requirements for market applications, particularly in solar and storage, solar plus storage requirements. So these efforts are underway. Equipment's been ordered, and there'll be new capabilities available soon. Finally, just a word on some important work that took place at the Best Test and Commercialization Center over the past year. DNVGL was awarded a contract from Con Edison with funding from NYSERDA to perform fire safety testing for a number of battery chemistries. The main conclusion from the program, I encourage you to go online and download the final report, which is now available. But the main conclusion from the program is that installation of battery systems into buildings, while it introduces risk, these are manageable within existing building code and firefighting methods when appropriate conditions are met. These are important results that have been delivered to the City of New York, the Department of Buildings, the Fire Department of New York, DNY, and they are using this testing results to help inform their decisions as they look at siting for battery systems in buildings in New York City. It's important to note that some of the first approvals for lithium systems have been made, and additional decisions are in the works and expected shortly. So I think with that, turn it back to Bill.
Thanks, John. I think you can see all of the good work that's going on in the ecosystem here in New York State, and we're pleased to have an affirmation of the effectiveness of this work. Recently, NYSERDA issued a study that they commissioned through Industrial Economics, Inc. and EMI that looked at the economic impact in the state, both from job growth from 2012 on, and since our original economic impact study and projections going forward. And that work found that we had a 30% growth in jobs in the energy storage sector in the last 4 years, growing it to 3,900 jobs, and a 50% increase in revenue for the sector, growing to over $900 million. and affirmed the projections that the 2012 report had that the state has a substantial upside in economic development opportunity in the energy storage sector, with that $900 billion projected to grow to $8.7 billion by 2030. So we're very pleased to see the results of those efforts coming together, and we'll continue our emphasis on putting these resources in place. With that said, we'll now turn our attention to policy, where a lot of work is occurring, and Denise Sheehan will take you through those efforts. So, Denise?
Thanks, Bill. First, thanks everybody for taking the time to spend your Valentine's Day with New York Best. We're very flattered and appreciate you spending time with us today. So I really wanted to start my part of this webinar just to highlight and really give a sense of what guides us as we approach different policy and regulatory proceedings here in New York, and what our goals are on behalf of the organization. And really, it's to ensure that energy storage does play a major role in achieving the state's energy and environmental goals. We have aggressive environmental goals here in New York State for climate change and for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We want to ensure that the benefits of storage are recognized, and that storage and all of its many attributes are recognized in those policies, and that storage can be fully monetized. And then we also want to remove the barriers to the marketplace for energy storage. So as I get into more of the details of the different regulations and policies that are underway here in New York, I just wanted to frame that these are our goals as we move forward. So many of you are well familiar with the many different ongoing initiatives here in New York State. But at a high level, the ones impacting the electric grid, which is what I'm going to focus my portion of this on, is the Reforming the Energy Vision, the REV initiative, the Clean Energy Standard, Clean Energy Fund, and more recently work at the New York ISO to create a distributed energy resource roadmap and to undertake some work in terms of integrating public policy. So these are some of the highlights, the major initiatives that I'm going to be talking about. REV, the Reforming the Energy Vision, began in the spring of 2014. Yes, it's hard to believe that 3 years has passed. The overall objective of REV, many of you are familiar, is to transform the state's electric industry with the creation of new business models around market-based, sustainable products, and to essentially modernize the electric grid and involve customers more in their decisions about where they get their energy. So the purpose of this really comprehensive and I'd say world-leading initiative is to create a power grid of the future and to really forever change the way consumers buy and use energy. That involves new policies, new market mechanisms to encourage and reward consumers to use these new technologies to control their own energy usage. A big component of this is increasing the penetration of DERs, or distributed energy resources, and creating new market mechanisms to make that possible. So you may have seen these slides before. These are from our roadmap that we issued last January. For those of you who haven't seen that, it's available on our website. It's still very prescient a year later. But as this illustration shows really the centralized power, the existing the power grid, and what we're really going to be transforming from. It shows you a centralized power system where everything is rate-based, and the focus really is on capital infrastructure. So this is what we're moving away from, and this next illustration is what we're moving towards: a more decentralized, distributed system of energy resources where customers are engaged, and new business models for utilities. It's also allowing utilities who are actually functioning as platform providers to actually earn income from that role. Okay, so what actually has happened in the 3 years since REV began? First and foremost, the REV policy framework was adopted, and that was an important first step to basically spell out that that utilities will be serving as distributed system platform providers. It also allowed and really required utilities to prepare REV demonstration projects to test new business models involving distributed energy resources. Since 2014, we've also created a new benefit cost analysis framework, and PSC has also issued a new rate making and business model. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these things as well. All right. The main things in terms of keeping our eye on the ball with respect to REV, and this is where we're going to be focusing our energies in 2017, are on the plans that utilities are putting together in their new role as distributed system platforms. These plans, the Public Service Commission actually issued guidance for utilities to put together these plans, and I'll talk a little bit about those on the next slide. We're also going to be focused on another proceeding on the value of distributed energy resources, which is really at the heart of how we will monetize and the compensation mechanisms for DERs. And then also elements of the rate making and utility business models will be developed. You'll be seeing those developed in 2017 as well. So I just want to take a minute on the utility DSIPs, Distributed System Implementation Plans. These are really our view into how the utilities are approaching REV and their role in their new role as distributed system platform. They actually are consistent with the guidance by Public Service. The goal is to be able to provide a source of public information so that any DER providers can look at these DSIPs and understand the direction a given utility is taking towards integrating DERs in their operations. It's also, the DSIPs are important in that the Commission will be using these to supervise the implementation of REV. So utilities filed their first and what's called initial DSIPs in June this past summer. And then a second phase was filed in November, which was filed jointly by all of the utilities, and that's known as the joint DSIP. So New York Best, and actually the Executive Director, Bill Acker, participates in the Joint Utilities Advisory Committee. That's been a very valuable opportunity for New York Best to provide the utilities with information about storage and how energy storage can play a role with the utilities in terms of their achieving REV objectives. So New York Best has weighed in on the DSIPs that were filed both in June and in November. First, I just want to say that we do obviously commend the utilities for the level of effort that they've put into these plans. This is a major change of the way of doing business for utilities in terms of sharing well in advance what their plans are and sharing information publicly. So there is a lot of good information in the DSIPs as far as the direction that the utilities are planning to move in. However, we do have some concerns which we have shared in comments with PSC, and they're articulated here on this slide, but primarily our concern is that the process is much too long, and that the path to integrating DERs is really not as clear as it should be. We have recommended that PSC take a more proactive approach and provide more direction, create more benchmarks, and actually ensure that the utilities are moving in a timely way towards a robust integration of DERs. We've also recommended, one of the things we noted in the DSIPs is that there's really not a strong link between the utilities plans and the state's goals for renewable integration. So we basically highlighted that and indicated that we do want to see a very strong role for storage as renewable integration and renewable penetration is increased in the state. We also highlighted that storage can and should be playing an important role in increasing hosting capacity with the utilities and their distribution systems. We identified the need to expand opportunities for what's being referred to as non-wires alternatives, so alternative substations and wires upgrades, if you will, and also the important role that storage can play in non-wires alternatives. So and then finally in the DSIPs, we specifically, as part of our comments, recommended that PSC establish some specific targets for the utilities to integrate storage in their DSIPs and in their plans. Our comments were filed January 9th, and those are currently under review by staff. So I think it'll be important to see what happens with the DSIPs and how the Commission responds, how staff and the Commission responds to the numerous comments they received on these plans. So that will be, there is no time frame for that at this point, but it is something that we expect to see in 2017. Another major thing that we're focusing on, and this gets really to the issue of monetization and of the value of storage and really compensation mechanisms for storage. And it's the proceeding that's referred to as the value of distributed energy resources, or the successor to net energy metering. This proceeding is also how what I refer to as how we spent our summer. It's really looking at, the goal was to create a new interim program for valuing DERs and really to replace or to create a next, to phase out the state's net metering program and create a new program for DERs, and create new tariffs and compensation mechanisms for DERs. So through the course of the summer, there were a number of stakeholder meetings, which we were very engaged in. I know many of you were as well. This past fall, the DPS staff put forward an interim approach, the sort of phase one, if you will, for how to move forward with a new valuation for DERs. But it was primarily focused on solar. New York Best advocated for a solar plus storage program, or an element to the program that would allow for solar plus storage, and it was included in the staff report, so that was good news. The Public Service Commission is meeting tomorrow, and we expect to see a decision on this tomorrow. So, Thursday. What day is it? I'm sorry, Thursday. So we'll let you know as soon as that's out. We'll blast that out to our membership. So then what happens next, we should probably see also in the decision a path forward, a recommended path forward for how we really deal with the remaining DERs and how we can, and moving beyond it, just an interim program to more of a full valuation of distributed energy resources. So that will likely be articulated in a decision that comes out of the Commission on Thursday. New York Best has advocated for a separate effort really looking at valuing and monetizing storage in this proceeding. So we are hopeful that that recommendation will be followed in the Commission's decision on Thursday. So one of the key elements of REV that we are involved in is the rate making and utility business models, which is known commonly as the REV Track 2. And this came out late last spring. The Commission ordered, basically put forth, I would say it's really the implementation arm of REV, and it's establishing a modern regulatory model for utilities. So essentially looking at what are the new ways for utilities what new business models utilities need to put in place that PSC is authorizing them to put in place for them to earn revenue doing things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to earn revenue for. So, DER integration and related and the benefits that those can provide. So it basically puts forward opportunities for utilities to earn new revenues, change some of their rate-making practices, and design new rates and pricing structures and tariffs. It includes a concept known as earnings adjustment mechanisms. Also, it's another acronym, EAMs. So it's incentivizing utilities to really develop new activities, bring them to a market scale, and earn revenues on those. Things like becoming more efficient, running the system more efficiently, reducing peak demand, controlling customer bills, and things of that sort. So the specifics are included on this slide, and it basically the different earnings adjustment mechanisms that PSC has authorized utilities to adopt and actual file plans on. The one that is most of interest to New York Best and to the storage industry is the System Efficiency EAM. And each utility is required to file a proposal on System Efficiency EAM, which they did in December, that looks at ways to reduce do peak reduction and load factor targets. The goal really is to improve system efficiency, reduce peak load, and increase the load factor. So we're very zeroed in on these. The EAMs are intended to be adopted in the utility's next rate filing. And I have a slide here that shows you where things currently stand. Con Ed did file its EAM for system efficiency as part of its rate case, which was approved in January. RG&E and NYSEG have filed, they filed theirs in December, and it's proposed as part of their current ongoing rate case, and Orange and Rockland just filed their plan yesterday. We also, I understand that Central Hudson is planning theirs for the summer, and National Grid is planning theirs for April. New York Best has advocated with department staff that we really need to have a more centralized process for these EAMs. They have they're extremely important for achieving the REV objectives. We've identified some concerns with the approaches that the utilities have put forward in these initial EAMs, and we're hopeful that we can get a more robust stakeholder involved plan put together for EAMs going forward. And then I just want to mention briefly the Clean Energy Fund is another big leg of the REV stool. This was approved by the PSC. It's a 10-year, $5.3 billion program, which includes the 5 elements you see on this slide. Market development is the area of focus that we are really zeroed in on. This past summer, the NYSERDA filed an energy storage chapter with $24.5 million over 4 years for energy storage soft cost reduction, which we're going to hear more about from Jason momentarily. We also are anticipating the potential for a solar storage intervention to come out of the Clean Energy Fund, and there's a transportation piece to this as well, that a chapter that was filed for electric vehicle innovation, which is about $53 million. So this is also starting to take shape, and again, Jason's going to speak to the soft cost work momentarily. The Clean Energy Standard, many of you have, I'm sure, are familiar that the state in this past summer adopted a Clean Energy Standard that mandates 50% of the state's energy must come from renewable sources by 2030. All load-serving entities share this obligation, and so it's essentially utilities who are responsible for meeting this obligation. They will demonstrate compliance through the purchase of RECs, and there is a nuclear or zero emission credit component to the program, and that involves upstate nuclear generation. For the Clean Energy Standard, New York Best has really urged the Commission to embrace storage as a key enabling role for meeting the targets. And we specifically recommended a no regrets target of 1 gigawatt of storage by 2022, 2 gigawatts by 2025, and 4 gigawatts by 2030. We provided the Commission and DPS staff with modeling and analysis to support those targets, and we continue to advocate for those before the Department and the Commission. And then I do want to highlight one of the things that recently was announced. In January, Governor Cuomo announced an agreement with Entergy that Indian Point nuclear plant will close by 2021. This nuclear plant provides 2,000 megawatts of power to the New York City metro area. Obviously, as the plans are put in place, we believe this creates a tremendous opportunity for storage, and are advocating for storage to play a role in the replacement plans for Indian Point. On the wholesale market front, New York Best works with the New York ISO. I know many of you were involved in the FERC notice of proposed rulemaking involved with, the comments were just recently submitted on. We're actually seeing at the wholesale level, both at FERC and at the New York ISO, some promising steps for storage. Obviously, the FERC NOPR was intended to remove barriers to wholesale markets for storage, and in New York State, some similar positive developments with the DER roadmap that the New York ISO released in January. We do have some concerns, both with the NOPR as well as with the roadmap that the NISO put out, dealing with how capacity for short-term resources, how aggregation is, rules for aggregation, as well as size thresholds. So clearly we'll be working with the New York ISO as they bring life to the roadmap and as some of the items included in the roadmap are further developed. So it'll be a busy year, I think, at the New York ISO as you see what happens with FERC. And obviously, one of the other things that we're really kind of watching at the New York ISO, and it's a work in conjunction with the Public Service Commission, is the state resources planning and implementation of the Clean Energy Standard, understanding what that's going to look like. Okay, and then I think I've covered everything on this one. We can come back to it if anyone has any questions on the wholesale market. Again, it's a promising time, and I think as details are developed, New York Best will be involved in these meetings at the New York ISO. And then this is my lastly, not to be left out, is the New York State Legislature. The legislature has taken a very big interest in certain elements of what's happening with the state's energy planning. Notably, yesterday there was a hearing on the environment and energy. There were a lot of questions posed about the Indian Point closure, how the state is going to plans to proceed, and impacts on the local community from a local taxes perspective. There's also, on the flip side, people who are very interested in making sure that Indian Point is closed and that we have renewable energy to replace that closure. There's also a lot of interest at the legislature in the nuclear zero emission credit program and the funding that's going to that effort. And then just lastly, obviously, the New York Best and the energy storage community is very interested in development in the legislature for the possibility of developing legislation that would require the Department of Public Service to study the need for storage and establish a storage procurement target. Those of you who follow California and Massachusetts know that this is very similar to what was adopted in both of those states, and most recently in Massachusetts. So New York Best is very obviously tuned into this effort, and we will keep you apprised as it takes shape. So I hope I didn't exhaust you with the update on policy, but you can see it was a busy 2016, and it will be a busy 2017. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Bill.
Very good. Thank you, Denise. And really, all of this policy work is designed to do one thing, which is to create the right environment and the right market structures to allow the energy storage industry to grow and thrive in New York State. And so as we start talking about the markets, I want to begin, though, before I get into the actual discussions here, reminding you that we will be taking questions fairly shortly when we conclude the webinar. We'd like to have them queued up to the extent possible in the chat box. So if you've had any questions with regard to what you've heard so far, or as they come up during this part, please do type them into the chat box. Now, with regard to markets, I'll talk briefly about transportation and a little bit about the electricity grid. In the transportation area, New York State is a party to the 8th State MOU on zero-emission vehicles with a goal of 850,000 vehicles in 2025. There is a lot of work going on within the state to realize that goal. And one of the very important aspects of that is a vehicle incentive program that NYSERDA is working on releasing and is scheduled to release before April. So we will be seeing a new incentive program for the purchase of electric vehicles very shortly here in the state. The governor also recently announced an increase to the charging station program in the state, 500 additional charging stations to be deployed, and importantly, 69 new charging stations to be deployed on the state's thruway system to really create the environment and infrastructure necessary to achieve the EV goals. And lastly, in state initiatives, it was also recently announced a state assistance for local government procurement of electric vehicles and infrastructure. So the idea of having the state lead by example through local government purchases. One thing that has evolved, we believe, in a very important way in the conversation around vehicles in New York State has been the recognition of grid vehicle interaction. Today, MJ Bradley released a study. This is a statewide cost and benefit analysis for plug-in vehicles for New York State, and addressing the benefits of the electricity grid from having plug-in vehicles. And I think everyone pretty readily recognizes the environmental benefits of electric vehicles. But it's frequently missed that there are great benefits associated with the electricity grid and to electricity consumers. The MJ Bradley study released today found that just meeting the 2025 goal, near-term goal, would have a cumulative benefit of $17.8 billion to the state by 2050. And importantly, nearly a third of that benefit accrued to utility customers in the form of lower rates. So it's not just the vehicle purchasers that are getting the benefit or the society at large, the emissions reductions, but directly lower rates to utility customers. And when they studied the higher penetration numbers needed to reach the greenhouse gas goals, they found that $17.8 billion benefit grew to over $75 billion. So a significant opportunity for the state, and New York Best will be working on further educating people on those areas and continuing to work to accelerate our transition to zero-emission vehicles within the state. Lastly, because of this link to the grid, utilities are becoming much more interested in this area, and the PSC has become much more interested. So in the joint DSIP filings, the joint utilities have laid out plans associated with electric vehicle adoption, and New York Best will continue to work with utilities in those areas. Now, moving over to the grid side, we've seen a lot of activity around the country in energy storage on the electricity grid. Recently, a number of New York Best members have been involved in projects at Aliso Canyon in California, which I think are very important to demonstrate the speed of deployment of energy storage. We saw projects that megawatt systems, and in fact, in certain cases, tens of megawatt systems, were deployed in as little as 6 months. So the ability to show the speed and flexibility of energy storage on the grid. Here in New York, there are two-pronged approach to energy storage projects. A very important prong is the demonstration of new business models associated with Rev Demo projects. And we are engaged in a program called Rev Connect. Navigant is the lead on that. New York Best is a partner that is designed to catalyze new projects on the electricity grid, to work with utilities to bring forward the system needs so everyone understands what the needs are, what problems can be solved, and by virtue of having a portal to educate people and to channel projects to the utility, and a facilitation team that actually engages with vendors and utilities to help catalyze these projects. We believe we can be much more effective in bringing forward new business models and new energy storage projects within the state. Examples of Rev Demo projects, Con Ed has recently announced a second energy storage Rev Demo project. The first they had is the Behind the Meter project, which is an exciting virtual power plant project, which capitalizes on energy storage at people's houses aggregated together. This new one that just was released is a front of the meter project that is demonstrating storage as a service, where it's actually using a lease space at commercial facilities to deploy energy storage and utilize wholesale values and values back to the energy storage, to the utility themselves. Now, my last slide on the markets on the grid is focused on particularly what's going on here in New York and monetizing value, which gets to a lot of what Denise was just talking about. We are very excited that New York City became the first city in the country to announce a storage goal. They've established a goal of 100 megawatt hours of storage by 2020. We've seen a lot of activity in the state around non-wires alternatives. Offsetting capital requirements for utilities, and an example of that is the Brooklyn Queens demand management programs. Most of these projects that we're seeing so far are in fact focused on peak load reduction, demand charge reductions with added circuit system loads benefits. Additional revenue streams become important as we see these projects are going to expand. And to realize those additional revenue streams, these are real values that need to be recognized in some way. In the long term, REV will recognize them through market mechanisms. In the short term, we have a number of interim mechanisms that are being put in place. So Denise mentioned the solar plus storage intervention that CERTA is working on, that we expect to see coming out in the next few months. And the value of DPR efforts and the wholesale efforts that are adding on those revenue streams. And lastly, before I get to Jason with the soft costs, I want to touch upon financing. And New York Best has been working in the financing areas to facilitate connections and educate the financing community. We've engaged with the Green Bank on this topic and with the DOE Financing Working Group. And in these areas, bankability and performance confidence through both testing and performance guarantees, insurance policies, et cetera, are going to be important in the future. And New York Best is working to facilitate some of those activities and talking to people and making connections in those communities. So a lot of what we've talked about today has been around what we actually introduced last year at this call, which was the New York State electricity grid energy storage roadmap. That roadmap pointed to many, many different activities that were needed to realize the markets here in New York. And those included ecosystem, those included a lot of the policy pieces that Denise talked about today. And very importantly, it addressed soft costs, the reduction of soft costs in order to grow the market. And we're very pleased that in that intervening time, that CERTA has developed a soft cost initiative, and we have Jason Doling, who leads that effort for CERTA, here to spend a couple minutes talking to us about the soft cost initiative for that CERTA is leading. So, Jason, if I could ask you to say a few words on the topic. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. So if you could advance to the next slide, I'm going to try to just take a couple of minutes to tee this up. And really that's because I'm going to ask for everybody's indulgence with preferably having a webinar that's dedicated to this area in the really near future, because I think we will be having some good opportunities to announce. So I've spoken before on why we are interested in soft costs, and just to kind of reinforce for those who are less familiar with the New York markets, our best indications are that a behind-the-meter system, a 4-hour system here in New York City, soft costs can comprise anywhere from 25% or more of the total cost of that system. It's a really sizable number. And so we've committed to helping reduce those soft costs by 25% in 3 years and a third in 5 years. That equates to about 10% of the installed cost of a system today, that 25% reduction. And that's through 3 main areas: permitting uncertainty, permitting cost time frames, customer acquisition costs, and uncertainty in revenue and performance that leads to higher financing costs. If we could hit to the next slide, and as this slide queues up, I want to apologize if there are applicants on this call who have not received a formal letter yet, which you should have, from our contracts unit regarding the soft cost reduction RFP. You're about to see who was selected, and this is not the way that I would generally want anybody to find that out. Hopefully that's not the case, but just in case. We have released a request for technical assistance contractors, and on here you're seeing who's been selected to help us in reducing those soft costs. And I'm going to touch on the 4 areas that are our focus within that work. And this is really all around helping a rising tide to lift all boats. So this is publicly available work that will be able to be of use to all developers, customers, AHJs, anyone interested in storage. The first item was mentioned already, and that's the initial report that's come out from the battery burn testing that we conducted with Con Ed using DNVGL. And that was based upon systems that are in the queue right now for permits in New York City. So 4 lithium-ion chemistry variations, lead acid, and a flow battery. And I've included the link to that report. I think it actually sets a really strong high bar for the industry, because we went into that with the expectation that any developers and manufacturers who were donating products for testing would have the ability to remain anonymous, and that anonymized data would be included in that public report. And as the work was conducted and it really started to provide greater clarity on what are the true risks that result from a system, whether it's an internal or an external fire, what's the rate of heat build-out, what are the gases and toxins released, what's the effectiveness of extinguishment techniques. It started to indicate that these were certainly, they're risks, but they're risks that are already existing within an urban environment and a built community. And what becomes different in this case is that there are multiple risks that are needed to be treated simultaneously. But when that work was conducted, each of those manufacturers and developers agreed to be acknowledged. So they're publicly showing, here's our cells, and here's how they performed, and here's what the risks were and how that risk can be mitigated. And I think that level of transparency is really, really important. So that work is planned to continue on either emerging chemistries or additional work that's needed on those on larger scale burn tests if that becomes the case. But really with the intention of taking that quantified data and transitioning it into clearer permitting guides that can give greater clarity to the developer community of what's required and help AHJs more readily review and more consistently review applications for siting so that it becomes clearer on what's required. Also within that area CUNY's Distributed Generation Hub is going to be helping with developing training materials and permitting guides, both for developers and also for working with the AHJ community throughout the state, so that you're hopefully not in a position of answering the same types of questions time and time again based on the municipality. For reducing customer acquisition cost, we're going to be contracting with ERS to conduct data mining, help identify characteristics of best fit customers, initially within interval metered customers, and then expanding to demand metered customers, so that the need to go in and do data logging, for instance, which is not an uncostly endeavor, is targeted really towards customers that have the best wherewithal for specific use cases to deploy storage and to deploy it in a cost-effective way. And again, all this work will be public as a result. For customer and vendor education, both ERS and New York Best are going to be engaged, and that's really around helping to understand use cases, what storage is, how different contracting mechanisms work from the customer's perspective, and from the vendor's perspective. It shouldn't be the best kept secret for the few vendors that have been able to optimize existing tariffs or the value streams, for instance, behind the meter and demand response that can currently be monetized. We want to share that information with the broader vendor community and help increase the number of vendors that are working in this space, particularly as tariffs and regulations in the wholesale market requirements continue to evolve. We want to help participate with that and help provide that information out to the developer community. And then Cadmus has been selected to help with increasing confidence in deployed systems, and that's through independent system performance and bill analytics on systems that have already been deployed. That information will be aggregated and posted on our distributed generation portal that currently has solar, CHP, and fuel cells. It will now have storage systems as well. So a potential customer could go on and see where systems have been deployed, how effectively they're working, and have a ability for also the vendor to have an independent assessment of how well that system is performing and how it could be further optimized by a party even outside of themselves. I'm going to pause there. I know we're starting to run close on time. Again, wanted to tee this up. The next slide has contact information for anyone who would like to talk further in the near term. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking more with you in the near future.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. And just to close, we also wanted to mention that we've started an initiative that's funded actually by both NYSERDA and RG&E NYSEG, that is called Capture New York Energy. That is a pavilion trade exhibit that we're bringing to a number of trade shows to promote New York-based companies, particularly startup companies, to the and vendor partners, resources in the state to help grow the market and grow business here in the state. With that said, we're going to take a couple questions. We actually are just about out of time. And if you want to type any more questions into the chat box, please feel free to do that. We have a number queued up here. One of them was how to get the link to the DMHL report, which Jason just gave. You also can find out on that CERTA website, DMP website. We'll actually have it up on the New York Best website as well. There are a couple other questions here, which in the interest of time, it's actually 2 o'clock already. I'm just going to hit a couple of them really quickly. There's a question about the Green Bank and whether some startups not viewing whether it's applicable to them, whether a group could be started or engaging. The answer is absolutely. We've been talking to the Green Bank and working with a few startups and talking to them. They do not provide equity capital for startups, but there are ways for them to help project developers and product developers within the state. So reach out to us if you're interested in that. there's a question about the ComEd EAMs, and to put that in a little perspective, when the staff white papers first suggested the EAMs, they first suggested the system efficiencies, they proposed a 10%, well, first a 100-hour peak reduction, which is about 14% reduction, and then a 3% per year reduction as proposals in the first white papers. The amounts that are being talked about now are more than a factor of 10 lower than that. So they are meaningful, but they're much lower than they could be, and we're very eager to continue those conversations and really realize the benefits that we had through deployment of technologies like storage to reduce the system peak loads. The other questions that we have, and we're 1 minute over, so I'm not going to take all of them right now, but there was a question about the slides, the systems that's being recorded, and you can contact the info at New York Best for the recording and slide discussions. With that said, I do want to encourage everyone to join us at Capture the Energy, which is coming up March 8th and 9th here in Albany. This is our annual event that historically is very well attended, and we're very proud of the program we've laid out for this year. It should be a very exciting and dynamic event to discuss many different aspects of energy storage and how the markets are moving forward in the state and how tech product development is occurring. So please do join us March 8th and 9th here at Albany, and please do also fill out the survey that will be coming up if you want to the screen. With that said, we thank you very much for participating in today's event. Happy Valentine's Day, and we look forward to seeing you at Capture the Energy on future webinars. Have a good day.